Many of you have probably heard of Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. He grew Apple to a phenomenal height, but loads of people don't know about his struggles. See, at some point during his Apple phase, he was actually kicked out of his own company. He was kicked out and almost banished to never to return to Apple. But during his interviews, when you find out about his struggle and what he went through, it turns out to be the best ever thing that ever happened to him. He met the love of his life, and he started 2 other companies, Pixar and this company called Next. Next was sold to Apple, and then he returned back to Apple as the CEO and then took Apple to another height. So it was almost like the obstacle that was put in front of him that completely would have destroyed him turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him. Now my question is, why is that? And now you look at the everyday common person, you can get all the money in the world, you can get the perfect relationship, you can get the perfect house, perfect family, perfect car, but still things can go wrong. Economies can collapse, relationships can turn sour, cars can get crashed. Like, my point being is, certain things in life are just out of our control. And now that is a really depressing way of looking at life, but that's what this video is about. What's happening, guys? Welcome back to my channel. This is Cash Talks, a place where you guys get to become the best version of yourself. And in this video, we're going to be going through another Stoicism topic called the power of indifference to obstacles. So like I mentioned, you can get everything perfect and do everything right, but there are certain things in life that are outside of our control that will impact us. And now the question is how we choose to deal with it. And our Stoics in ancient times would deal with it in the best way possible, and we can learn a lot from them. I learned a lot of this stuff from a book called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. So if you haven't already read that book, go check it out. It's a powerful book. But in this video, more specifically, we're going to discuss how to see obstacles as nothing, and if anything, see them as an opportunity for something more. So this video is actually one of 3 videos. There are 3 pillars to basically not being affected by obstacles in our life. Number 1, change your perception. Number 2, take action. And number 3, the will. Now in this video, we're going to be discussing how to completely change your perception, and more importantly, how to control your emotions. So I'm going to get straight to it. The first point of controlling your emotions and changing your perception is, number 1, understanding what you can control and what you can't control. Now, I already mentioned this in a previous Stoicism video that you guys should definitely go check out because it's really, really helpful. But in this video, I want to make clear you must only focus on what you can control, and that is the way you respond to a situation. If does happen, people will be annoying, people will leave us, people will hurt us, or economies collapse, like the weather's bad, whatever it is, there are things that go on outside of our control, and it's how we respond to it that matters. And that's why I say focus on what you can control rather than spending all of that energy and all of that wasted time and all of those emotions on things that you can't control. Like, just think about it. If you literally dedicated all of that energy of whatever trauma you're going through in your life or whatever situation you're in and put it all towards just solving the situation and putting yourself in a better position after it, instead of focusing on all the things that you can't change, how much more productive and how much more happier and successful you will be. This is the recipe for success and happiness. Now, more specifically on controlling our emotions, we need to remember one thing. Emotions don't decide our mood. It's the position we take towards that emotion that decides our mood. Let me explain. You may feel angry. Great, fine, you feel angry. But then if you then let that anger take over you and let that emotion control you rather than you control it, it becomes a problem. So the first part of controlling your emotions is to defeat it with logic. So when you first experience an emotion, whatever it is, because of this obstacle, you may feel upset, you may feel angry, you may feel stressed, whatever. Ask yourself logically, does this benefit me in any way whatsoever? And most of the time the answer is going to be no. Okay, fine, you have a reason now to dismiss the emotion. You may think, okay, fine, but is that healthy? Now, you should still feel the emotion, but the idea is to control it. See, if we just feel it and don't take control over it by logically accepting that this is destructive rather than constructive, then it becomes an issue because then it starts to control us. And we need to remember that. So, cry if you need to, especially men, like, I feel like there is this toxic thing about men not being able to cry. Look, if you want to cry, go cry. You know, get it out. It's better you get it out. But my point is, take control. So take control with logic. You know, is this a helpful thought? Does this benefit me? Do I really need to freak out about this? Is the emotion that I'm feeling, to the extent that I'm feeling it, justified? Like, ask yourself these typical questions just to kind of reassess that, is this worth it, basically? And now the next way of controlling your emotions is affirmations. You know, telling yourself that it's going to be okay. Simply telling yourself it's going to be okay is a massive way of defeating the anxiety that will come about, or the depression that you may be going through. Just telling yourself it's going to be okay constantly. Or maybe repeating things like, you know, I'm in control. I'm in control of my emotions. This isn't as bad as I think. My thoughts and emotions are exemplifying this. Like, even going as far as telling yourself things like, I'm not going to die from this. Like, communicating with yourself as though you would to a child, or as though you would to a friend. Like, it's going to be okay. Sometimes you need to have that self-talk. And that's where affirmations come in. So that's another way to control your emotions. And now the other way of controlling your emotions that Stoics really powerfully used is objectifying it. Now, if something goes wrong, there are two ways of looking at it: objectively and subjectively. So objectively is looking at it as XYZ has happened. You've objectively looked at it and it's happened. Subjectively looking at it means to look at it and go, XYZ is bad. Now you have subjectively given it a judgment, you've given it an opinion, and that is why it becomes subjective. Now the Stoics would only look at problems objectively. They wouldn't say whether it was bad or good. They wouldn't judge it. And that's a really powerful idea. And you know, a lot of ancient philosophies have discussed this idea of never judging the moment, because you never know what's going to come. So rather than judging it, look at it objectively as, okay, XYZ has happened. That's it. And I remember having a conversation recently with a really powerful entrepreneur. He's a young entrepreneur. I don't think I'm going to say his name because I don't know how he'd feel about it. But this entrepreneur, I said to him, like, how do you kind of deal with emotions in business? And he literally said, I look at it as a task. Like, that's it. If I'm going through a trauma in a business, or I'm going through something, I look at it as a task. How can I get from A to B? That's it. You take the emotion out so you can deal with it better. If you add emotions, all you're doing is clouding yourself. And now in that book, The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Holiday actually mentions another book, which I strongly recommend as well, called The Book of Five Rings, which is basically about an 16th century samurai swordsman. His name was, hold on one second, Miyamoto Musashi. Okay, cool. I'm not gonna be able to pronounce that. But point is, he said, the observing eye sees the events, and it sees it without distraction, no clouding, whatever. But the perceiving eye sees something as too big to even handle. And that's the difference. If you look at a problem in front of you, or a trauma, or something that you're going through, an obstacle, as just an obstacle, something to, you know, move past, rather than something that you're like, oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me, I can't handle it, blah, 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 blah. You start judging it, you start seeing it as the worst thing. Naturally, you're going to obviously think that this is too big for me to handle, and that's where depression and anxiety start to come in. So we need to remember, like, another book I strongly recommend is the Chimp Paradox. You know, this idea of the monkey mind. Like, it's going to create bigger things that it needs to be. Like, it's going to make things 10 times worse. And that's why it's important to defeat things with objectivity and logic. Another powerful technique that the Stoics would use is they would actually pretend that the obstacle was never even their obstacle. So that it would almost help them objectify it, because if they pretended that it wasn't even happening to them, they could imagine what advice they would give to someone else in that situation. Like, almost, it would help to basically make this situation completely irrelevant and just go, okay, how am I going to deal with this? So that's another technique that you may be able to use. Another technique is prayer. Like, there is this serenity prayer mentioned in the book, and it says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And now the other thing that they would do is they would live in the present. And now a lot of people speak about this, like so many philosophies speak about this. Taoism, you know, Vedic philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, and of course Stoicism. Like, living in the present is so important. And in modern day today, it's more important than ever, because we have so many distractions. Like, our phone is literally an access point to the entire world. So we need to live in the present. It's a lot easier said than done. So there's a few things that you can do. Number one is to catch yourself. So when you do feel like things are getting on top of you, just tell yourself, like, I'm present, I'm present, I'm present. Like, catch yourself be aware that, okay, I'm not being present, so let me bring myself to the present moment. And that's where you kind of start to be more aware of your surroundings, be more aware of what you're feeling, be more aware of what you're looking at, that kind of stuff. So focus more around your senses. Another thing is an affirmation, you know, telling yourself, I'm present, I'm present, I'm present. It's almost like convincing your subconscious mind, okay, start to be present now, start to be present. Another thing I like to do is set my intention at the beginning of the day. So at the beginning of every single day, I tell myself I am present. Like, I constantly will repeat to myself in some sort of way that I am trying to be present. So in those quiet moments of the morning, that's my time to really reflect and understand that I am trying to be present to help set me up for the day. Another thing is that thoughts will come and go, you know, that is just the way the mind works. But we need to remember that what these thoughts represent has nothing to do with us. Like, why that thing happened or why me and all of this stuff, like, it just has no constructive outcome. It's just a thought. And that is kind of one way we can bring ourselves to the present. And now, coming away from controlling emotions, but going back to this idea of changing our perception of whatever obstacle is put in front of us, is to think differently. What I mean by this is going beyond what's possible and just having faith and confidence in that. And now I give this example of Steve Jobs, right? He believed in a phone which only operated with one button. And our developers came up to him and kept saying, like, it's impossible, it's impossible, it's impossible. And he kept saying, go away, figure it out. He had this firm belief that it was possible. And now another example is that, like, it took centuries for 100-meter sprinter to break the 10-second barrier. Since then, 86 sprinters have done it. Why? Because suddenly they had belief that it was possible. So when you finally start to think differently and think beyond your own kind of scope of thinking and believe in something bigger, it's a lot easier to deal with obstacles that come our way. It's a lot easier to change our perception. So start to think differently, stay positive, stay confident, and have faith. I kind of want to bring this all back into one kind of summary point that you guys can go and take away. Like, this is the first part of the series. So number 1 is perception, number 2 is taking action, and number 3 is the will, right? So this idea of changing your perception comes through changing your emotions, it comes through thinking logically, it comes through looking at an obstacle objectively, and it comes through finally taking action and seeing opportunity within that obstacle. And that's going to be the next video. So if you have a bad boss, or you have a bad relationship, or you have just a bad situation you're in, just remember, it's not about the situation. It's about changing your perception of the situation. The situation is neutral. And I mentioned this in my previous video, which I strongly recommend you go and watch after this video if you haven't already seen it, because the situation is neutral. Your perception of how you deal with that situation is what matters. And that's going to be the defining thing that affects whether you go up from this situation or whether you go down from this situation. So I hope you guys like this video. Now, 3 videos I'm going to recommend to you guys to go and watch after this are going to be the Stoicism one if you haven't already seen it. The How to Bounce Back from Failure, that's a really powerful one. I don't mention Stoic philosophy, but I mention all these other philosophies which are great. And the Success Mindset, because I think that really relates to this philosophy. So those 3 videos I recommend. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because I promise you I'm going to be making loads more of these videos on philosophy and different types of philosophy and how we can use them in modern day society to benefit ourselves and become that best version of ourselves. So hit the like button, subscribe, comment, and I'll catch you guys next week. Cash Talks is out.